The 5 a.m. alarm did not wake Daniel. It erupted, a sharp, mechanical shriek that cut through the darkness of his bedroom. He slammed his hand down, killing the noise instantly. The silence that rushed back in was heavier than the sound. Daniel stared at the ceiling, his eyes tracing the faint, familiar cracks in the plaster. Outside, the world was still asleep, but here, the weight of another identical day pressed against his chest. He turned his head to the side. The room was cold, smelling of stale air and stagnant time. He counted the seconds. 35 years of living, and every morning felt exactly like this one. A mediocre job waited for him. A mounting pile of frustration waited for him. He lay still, his body heavy, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his own pulse. There was no movement in the house, no traffic on the street. Just the suffocating stillness of a life trapped in a loop. He gripped the edge of the mattress until his knuckles turned white, waiting for a reason to move. But the room offered nothing but the same four walls and the same quiet, hollow expectation of failure. He exhaled, a long, sharp sound that seemed to drain the last of his hesitation. Daniel swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet finding the cold floor. He stood up. The movement felt foreign, a sudden rupture in the rhythm of his own stagnation. He walked toward the corner of the room, his shadow stretching long against the wall. On the nightstand, a book waited. He picked it up. The cover was thin, the spine fragile from years of neglect. He moved to the small desk, pulled out the wooden chair, and sat. The silence remained, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a blank slate. He opened a notebook, the paper crisp and clean under his fingertips. With his other hand, he reached for a pen. He did not look back at the bed. He did not think about the office or the hours he had already lost. He looked at the white page. He pressed the pen tip to the surface and wrote the first goal. The ink flowed, dark and permanent. He was no longer waiting for the day to happen to him. He was building the day himself. 10 pages. He forced his eyes to track the lines until the text blurred into gray smears. Every muscle in his neck throbbed, a dull ache demanding he drop the book and return to the mattress. He pushed through it. He turned the final page, grabbed his pen, and scribbled a list of financial goals across the margin. The ink was uneven, his hand trembling with fatigue. He stood up, shoved the chair aside, and dropped to the floor. The carpet felt gritty against his palms. He started the first push-up. His arms locked, then buckled. He fought the tremor in his shoulders, lowering his chest until it brushed the floor, then driving upward. 1, 2, 3. By the 10th, his lungs burned with every inhale. The silence of the house remained, but his own ragged breathing filled the room. 15. His arms shook violently, refusing to hold his weight steady. He pushed again, every fiber of his body screaming for him to stop. 19. 20. He collapsed onto the floor, his chest heaving, sweat beading on his forehead. The clock showed 6 a.m. He had pushed past the limit, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a foundation. By the 10th day, the routine hardened into a habit. His body no longer revolted at the 5 a.m. alarm. He rose with the light. He sat at the desk, his hand reaching for the phone out of muscle memory, his thumb hovering over the screen. He saw the news notification icons, their red dots pulsing with urgent, irrelevant noise. He set the phone face down on the nightstand, silencing the world outside his walls. He did not open the book today. Instead, he pulled a fresh sheet of paper from his drawer. He began to map out a side business plan. He broke his goals into phases, calculating costs and identifying potential markets. The pen moved across the page with purpose, filling the margins with flowcharts and timelines. He analyzed investment strategies, jotting down percentages and projected growth. Outside, the neighborhood remained locked in sleep, but his mind raced with the mechanics of his own future. He was no longer just reading about success. He was architecting it. The 60 minutes that used to be wasted on headlines were now the most productive hour of his day. He finished the final note, underlined the primary objective, and looked at the clock. The foundation was set. 3 months had carved a new lens into his vision. He walked through the glass doors of the office, but the space no longer felt like a prison. He scanned the rows of cubicles. Where he once saw only people moving through the motions, he now saw the friction points. He watched the accounting team struggle with a manual data entry process that had been obsolete for years. He listened to the sales department complain about lead retrieval, hearing the exact gap in their workflow that he had mapped out during his morning sessions. The office hummed with the same background noise as always, but he was no longer part of the static. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, pulling up the notes he had refined in the quiet hours before dawn. His boss walked past, oblivious to the bottleneck, but Daniel kept his eyes on the screen. He highlighted the redundancies, cross-referenced the costs, and drafted a proposal that turned the company's biggest drain into a streamlined asset. The inefficiency that had defined this office for decades was suddenly transparent, a puzzle waiting for his specific solution. He leaned back, his pulse steady, realizing that his colleagues and his superior were staring at a problem they didn't even know how to name. Daniel walked to the boss's door, the printed proposal heavy in his hand. He knocked once, firmly, and stepped inside before the invitation was even offered. The boss looked up, a stack of folders obscuring the desk, eyes narrowing at the intrusion. "This is not the time, Daniel," the boss muttered, reaching for the telephone. Daniel did not retreat. He stepped forward and placed the document directly onto the blotter, blocking the boss's path to the folder. "It is the only time. If we want to reclaim the quarter's losses," Daniel said, his voice level and devoid of hesitation. The boss paused, hand hovering over the receiver, and glanced at the first page. Daniel stood perfectly still, his weight balanced, watching the boss's gaze move from the summary to the projected savings. The atmosphere in the office shifted from annoyance to sharp, critical interest. Every minute of the previous 3 months, every hour carved from the darkness of 5 a.m., condensed into this single, jagged intersection of risk and reward. The boss stopped reading and looked up, the air in the room suddenly thin and cold. Daniel held his breath, waiting for the verdict that would define his future. The boss tapped the desk twice, his gaze lingering on the final calculation. "Start it tomorrow," he said, the dismissal of the previous tension absolute. Daniel nodded, picked up his folder, and walked out of the office. The air outside felt different, lighter. By the end of the month, his inbox flooded with data tracking the project's success, and his paycheck reflected the bonus structure he had negotiated. He moved the surplus money into a separate account. He sat at his laptop, the screen reflecting in his eyes, and clicked through the registration process for his first investment portfolio. There was no fanfare, no celebratory drink, just the rhythmic clatter of keys as he moved the funds. He watched the balance update, seeing the numbers grow for the first time without his direct labor. The side venture, which had begun as a list of scribbled tasks in a dark room, now generated its own momentum. He checked the time. It was 5 a.m. again, but this time, he wasn't starting from scratch. He was building on the foundation he had laid. He closed the browser, stood up, and began his morning routine. His focus already shifted to the next objective. The door to the executive office clicked shut behind him. Daniel stood in the center of the room, the floor beneath his feet polished to a mirror finish. The morning light hit the desk, a heavy mahogany surface that felt alien compared to the small, cramped corner table he had used for years. He walked to the window. The city spread out below, a grid of movement that matched the order he had imposed on his own life. Everything here was a physical manifestation of the last 365 days. He touched the edge of the desk. It was solid, real. He had not arrived here through a singular stroke of luck or a sudden shift in fortune. He had arrived here 1 hour at a time. The silence of the office was different from the silence of his bedroom. It was not a void, but a space he had earned. He turned back to the room, his eyes tracing the clean lines of the workspace. He checked his watch. The hands marked the same hour he had spent in the dark a year ago. He took a breath, moved to the chair, and sat down to begin the work of the day. A knock at the door broke the rhythm of his morning. His friend pushed the door open, eyes scanning the new office, lingering on the view before settling on Daniel. He walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat down. "It has been a year," the friend said, leaning forward. "1 year ago you were complaining about the office coffee and the commute. Now you are here." He gestured at the walls, the space, the scale of the operation. "How did you do it? You skipped 3 levels of management in 12 months. He paused, his expression shifting into a knowing smirk. "I know how this business works. You do not get here without a mentor pulling strings or a massive, lucky break. Who put in the good word for you? Did you find an investor in the industry? The friend waited, tapping his fingers on the mahogany surface, clearly expecting a name or a hidden strategy. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Come on, tell me the real story. Was it a merger? A private deal? Daniel leaned back, his gaze fixed on the clock ticking on the wall. He did not answer. He simply watched his friend, who was still waiting for the easy answer, the one that would justify his own lack of progress. Daniel reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, worn notebook. He placed it squarely on the mahogany surface and slid it across the wood. The friend stopped tapping his fingers, his hand hovering over the object. He opened the cover. The pages were dense with handwritten lists, dates, and crossed-out tasks. There were no names of mentors, no mention of lucky market breaks, no secret mergers. The friend turned the pages, his eyes tracking the repetitive entries of early morning study and business planning. Daniel leaned forward. I did not have a secret, he said. I simply claimed 365 hours for myself while the rest of the world stayed in bed. The friend stared at a page dated months ago, the ink smudged where Daniel had written at 5 in the morning. The silence in the office shifted. The friend looked up, the smirk replaced by a steady, heavy realization. Daniel stood up and walked toward the window, leaving the notebook open on the desk. He did not need to offer further explanation. The pages spoke for themselves, a record of the quiet, disciplined hours that had built his future from the ground up.